Hey, how's it going? So, Silverwolf just came out, and I thought I would make a video talking about what I thought about her and how strong she seems to be and whether I would get her or not. So, first of all, let me just go over her skills real quick. So, basic attack is basic attack. Her talent is every time she attacks, she can place one of three bugs on an enemy, which is an attack down, a speed down, or a defense down, which is pretty nice, and they last 3 turns, pretty useful. Her ultimate is just a defense reduction to all the enemies and does some damage, which is pretty nice. But the really big thing is her skill. And this is an insane amount of text and can be kind of confusing to people. But basically the main thing is it reduces their damage res to a certain element type based on what your team is. So let's say you have a team that has quantum and fire on it. That means that you are going to reduce their weakness or reduce their resist to either of those elements by this 20% here, or I guess it depends on the level of the skill. And you also add a weakness to the enemy depending on your team. So let's say the enemy is only weak to lightning and imaginary. So if you have fire and quantum, you would have a 50% chance to add quantum weakness and a 50% chance to add fire weakness to the enemy when you use this skill on them. And every time you reuse the skill, it will re-roll which one it is. So it'll be a 50% chance of doing one or the other. This is how I believe it works from all the information that I gather. So if they already have the weakness on, you don't really want to reapply it until it's about to go away, because I believe that it lasts for 2 turns here. So you don't want to keep spam reapplying it unless it's not the element that you want. So keep that in mind. It might make it so that a full quantum team is insanely powerful, because then you're always adding quantum weakness to them, which is insane. So Sela and Silverwolf are really powerful together. But realistically, right now, you can't really do a team like that. So you might have someone like Natasha, which is quantum on the team, quantum and physical on the team, and then, 50-50 chance of getting the one you want. So you might have to roll it a few times. And you also reduce their resistance to all elements as well, which is pretty powerful. So her skill is insanely strong, where the enemy just takes so much extra damage, and adding a weakness on them is so big, because being able to break toughness bars is a huge deal on all difficult content, really. And then her ult reducing their defense, her talent reducing their speed or defense further, kind of insane. And if we look at her Lightcone as well, right? This reduces their, well, it doesn't reduce their defense, but increases the amount of damage that they take as well. Or you could even use the 4-star Lightcone Pearls of Sweat, which makes them take more damage as well, reduces the defense. So she just debuffs the enemies so hard, and the amount of damage increases are so huge that it's kind of incredible. It makes it so that you could have a buffer, someone such as Bronya on your team, and then have her as the debuffer. And rather than just stacking all those buffs on one character, you can just stack buffs on that character and then also reduce the enemy's defense by a ton. So you don't really have all of this diminishing returns from increasing attack and increasing damage just on your main character, which is pretty nice. Her Lightcone is very powerful. Increased effect hit rate, that's awesome. She needs that. The crit rate on here is showing that they kind of want her to be a bit of a damage dealer, or unless you're using on somebody else, and then they take more damage, which is nice. I'm going to talk about the relics after everything else, because I believe we need to look at the traces and eidolons to really get the full picture of how this character is intended to be built. So first of all, this is pretty nice. It increases the bug duration by 1 turn. That's the attack down, speed down, defense down from her talent, which is pretty nice. This makes it so that her skill increases duration by 1 turn. That's absolutely necessary rather than having to spam apply it. And then this one is pretty interesting. When using her skill, if the enemy has 3 or more debuffs, which, you're putting on 2 debuffs minimum right there, and then her ult is a 3rd debuff, so she puts on a ton just by herself. But yeah, it lowers their all type res by another 3%, so you're doing maybe about like an extra 10% all type res, I believe, just from her skill, which is incredibly powerful. Stacking on top of all the extra damage increases is kind of insane. But her talents are relatively simple, but look also, they're giving her stuff like attack, and they're giving her effect hit rate all built in. So I think it adds some flexibility to how you can build her. I believe that she's meant to be built as a character kind of like Pella, where she's a debuffer that also does a bit of damage and contributes, even though she's not like a big main damage dealer. And when you look at her Eidolons, it really paints that picture too. I'm going to need to test a lot more her damage capabilities and whether or not I should go really high effect hit rate or if I should do a mixture. But when you look at her Eidolons here, so the first one recharges 7 energy for every debuff that the target enemy currently has when she uses her ult. So if you have a ton of debuffs in the enemy, that means she can loop her ult a lot faster, and she puts on like what 3 to 4 automatically just by herself. So that's actually really easy to do, and stacking multiple bugs, like she's basically so self-sufficient with this. It's actually really good for being able to use her ult more often. I think it's very powerful. When an enemy enters battle, reduces their F-res by 20%. That's insanely powerful. I don't think we've had anything like that in the game. A lot of enemies have a base effect resist that's not super high. Reducing it by 20% leaves most enemies completely vulnerable with no resist at all. And for some boss monsters, I think they might still have some left over. But the way that the effect resist calculation works, like if an enemy has 100 effect resist, it means you can never debuff them, ever. So reducing enemies' effect res by 20% is actually really big. It's actually such a huge increase in your capability of landing debuffs. It's a very big deal, especially for the future content, maybe. Her fourth one, after she uses her ultimate to attack enemies, does an extra 20% quantum damage based on her attack for every debuff currently on the enemy up to 5. This is showing that she actually really can be built as a damage dealer. But the thing is, you might need the Eidolons to really help her along that way. If you don't have her Eidolons, it might mean that her damage capabilities are a little bit too low, and maybe then you have to build her just more as a support. This happened a lot in Genshin, where characters would be like a pretty solid character and support, but if you got their constellations, then suddenly they could be your main DPS or something. And when you look at her E6, for every debuff the target enemy has, the damage dealt by Silver Wolf increases by 20% up to 100%. So if you have her E4 and E6, she starts doing an insane amount of damage. I would actually say she could be maybe a main damage dealer. Although if you think about it, most characters E6 are pretty insane, so she has her work cut out for her, I suppose. But this shows that although she is a support and she does a huge amount of debuffing for your team and increases your damage by so much, and it's just so much utility, I think she can be a big damage dealer. Now, if we're talking about something like Relics, I think that using something like the Quantum set actually seems alright on her. She can add the Quantum weakness to enemies, and that makes it so that you get the double Quantum effect of being able to pierce 20%. Although I suppose the diminishing returns, since you're already reducing their defense by so much, you could also use something like the Musketeer set, just for extra speed. Although, you know, she's not going to be basic attacking too often. But I think that she's relatively flexible with the sets. Maybe sets in the future as well she could also utilize. As for her secondary set, so right now she's using the effect hit rate one, which also increases her attack percent. And I don't actually have a quantum chest piece that has good stats for her to utilize or anything like that, right? But you could go with an effect hit rate chest piece and run her full debuffer, and then along with the Pan-Galactic Commercial Enterprise, it'll increase her attack by an extra amount based on her effect hit rate, which is pretty nice. But I actually don't think that that kind of chest piece is necessary. I think that you can go a damage chest piece and get the substats on your other pieces of gear along with just her base stats and her Lightcone of effect hit rate. And I think you can get enough that you don't really need to have a main stat of it on the chest piece and can go more damage. And along with that, I'm not sure you actually really need to use this set for the extra effect hit rate. I think that you instead could go with something such as Fleet of the Ageless, just to increase the damage of the team by a little bit more as well. I think that would also work pretty well on her. And since she's a support that does damage, you might actually finally have a use for a Fleet of the Ageless that has damage on the orb rather than just HP, which would be kind of cool, I guess. Same with finally getting a link rope. That would be something useful, right? I think that energy regen rate seems really good on her. If you were running her main, like, big damage or something, then I guess maybe don't do it. But I think energy recharge is just such a big deal. You can't really get it on most stats. So having it as the rope is a pretty huge percentage increase that you can't normally get. But going along with that, you could actually use the Sprightly Von Whack, how are you supposed to say that? The Sprightly set to give the energy recharge rate and to make it so that she always gets the first turn, so you can instantly add a weakness onto the enemy, which could be really strong actually for a lot of battles, especially if you're just trying to win super quickly. Maybe if you're trying to like speed run Memory of Chaos or something. But I think those are the main possibilities for what I would use as her relics. And overall, here's how I put Silverwolf. I think she's a really good character. She's a character that just adds so much utility to your team, and she even does a little bit of damage, which is pretty nice. I think that she's a really powerful character if you're trying to go with a Seela team. If you're not using Seela though, or you don't own her, I think that she's not nearly as good, because that means that your team is going to be split between a lot of different elements. And I think you want a really condensed element team of either 1 to 2 at most. And once you start going 3 to 4, then she's adding weaknesses on the enemy that you don't really want, and there's so much RNG, just not as worthwhile. Although she's still going to be really useful, more useful than a character like Pella will ever be, right? She is a 5-star limited character after all. So I think that adds a lot of strength to her. That said, I don't think that she's like a must pull for everybody, right? Like, I think Luocha, who's coming up, is actually going to be a really good character too. He might have a weakness of being too squishy. We'll have to see how it actually pans out when he releases. But all in all, I think that she's a really solid character, good for many people. I think you can run really strong 4-star DPS and then have her as a 5-star support, you know, if you're kind of on the fence. If you have Seela, I think she's an amazing addition to your team, and you can run them together. When you have Bronya and Seela, they use a crazy amount of skill points, and I think a lot of people actually have trouble upkeeping that. But I think someone like Silverwolf doesn't need to use quite as many as someone like Bronya has to, and that can make it a lot easier on your load. Hell, you could even use them together if you want to get really spicy, especially if you have Bronya's first Eidolon that can refresh the skill point. I think that would be the biggest possible damage you could do. But at the same time, you still need a healer, and we don't have a wind healer, we don't have a quantum healer. So I think that Silverwolf's value will only go up as the game continues. But until then, just at the current point, I think it's kind of Seela or nothing. But overall, really good character. I recommend people pull her if they actually like her. I think a lot of people were excited for her. But if you're really on the fence, you're really not feeling it, maybe wait until they fully show off all of Luocha's stuff before you actually decide to commit. But anyways, as always, thanks a bunch for watching. I appreciate it a bunch. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like or subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you next time.